A lot of series have that game, which, while not bad, has picked up a negative reputation in hindsight due to its negative influence on the series. A great example of this would be New Super Mario Bros. DS, a great 2D platformer that today is somewhat despised as spawning a bunch of identical New Super Mario Bros. Sequels. For me, Tales of Graces is that game in the series. A game which, while I love it for what it is, I also hate it for what it did to the series. So with that odd ramble out of the way, let's dive into Tales of Graces for both the Wii and PlayStation 3. Just a quick reminder that this Tales of Graces retrospective was brought to you by my lovely patrons like Cameron Strauss. For as little as $3 Australian a month, you can get your name shouted out at the start of every Xenosanctum video, as well as access to bonus behind the scenes content. As I mentioned in the Tales of Hearts retrospective, following the release of the Tales of Destiny PS2 remake, Team Destiny decided that the time was right to finally move on from 2D and create their first fully 3D Tales game. The move to 3D would prove to be a monumental task for Team Destiny, who unlike Team Symphonia did not have the experience in designing 3D battle systems. It was likely due to this factor that the team would aim to release their first 3D Tales game on the Nintendo Wii, whose standard definition display allowed for a smoother development time in comparison with the HD consoles of the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. Despite developing for the Wii, the team would still be faced with the grand task to create this game, which would result in the team taking an additional year to develop the game compared with their past titles. Producing this new Tales game would once again fall to Hideo Baba, who would juggle responsibilities between this Wii Tales game and Tales of Hearts on the DS. Meanwhile, directing this game would be Kazuya Ishizuka, who you might remember from the Tales of Destiny retrospective was the scenario writer for that game. For this game's scenario writer, the team would go with newcomer Daisuke Kiga, who would go on to write the scripts for the next 3 Tales games. For this game's plot, Daisuke would craft a plot around the bonds that we develop as children, as well as how those bonds change as we grow older. This narrative would coincide with the game's characteristic genre of RPG to know the strength to protect. As with the game's name of Tales of Graces, it hasn't exactly been made clear what the name represents, with most fans believing it alludes to the themes of blessing and forgiveness which both crop up in the game's plot. Meanwhile, others believe it alludes to the royal nature of the game, with the majority of the cast being made up of nobility. Tales of Graces would be teased in the 2008 Tales press conference, with the team revealing that the next Tales game would be coming out next year on the Wii. A full trailer of the game would later be shown at Nintendo's 2008 Autumn Conference, but only to attendees. The wider public would later get to see the trailer by getting a pre-order bonus DVD with Tales of Hearts. Wait, we're doing this crap again? God damn it, Bandai Namco! Either way, the game will be set for a release on the 10th of December 2009. With the game's name and details revealed to the world, Bandai Namco would spend 2009 promoting the launch of the game. This included bundling the game with the Wii as well as the recently released Wii Classic Controller Pro. For a more obscure form of promotion, Bandai Namco would team up with the House Foods Corporation to release special Graces branded Marbo Curry. The team would also release the DSiWare game Kamen Merchant, which acted as a companion game with Tales of Graces on the Wii, and I talk more about it here in this YouTube short. Meanwhile, on the Western front, English-speaking fans would be disappointed to learn that Bandai Namco had no plans to localise Tales of Graces on the Wii. However, a year later in 2010 would see the announcement of a PS3 port of the game. This new version, titled Tales of Graces F, would fix multiple bugs which had been discovered in the Wii release, as well as add an additional epilogue chapter set a few years after the end of the main game. Bandai Namco US would initially tease the localization of the PS3 port on Facebook in early 2012, before later officially announcing the game's Western release date of the 3rd of March in North America and the 31st of August in Europe. With Western fans waiting 2.5 years for this game, was the wait all worth it? The story begins in the province of Lant, which is part of the Kingdom of Windor. Here we meet Ashbel and Hubert Lant, the sons of the local lord, who are sneaking out of town to explore the nearby cliffs. There, the two run into a mysterious purple-haired girl. Inquiring who she is, the girl seems confused and is unable to tell them her name. Feeling the girl needs help, the two brothers return back to town where Ashbel faces his sickly childhood friend Sheria Barnes, who is furious that the two boys ran off. After calming Sheria down and introducing her to the mysterious girl, the four head back to Lant Manor, where Ashbel learns that an important dignitary is visiting town. It's also around this time that Ashbel, seeing the mysterious girl's interest in Sophia flowers, decides to name the girl Sophie. When the dignitary arrives in town, Aspel and co decide to break into his room to meet him in person. The dignitary turns out to be Prince Richard of Windor. Aspel wants to be friends, however Richard perceives Aspel's advances as a political move to earn favour. However, this later changes when Aspel saves Richard from an assassination attempt. Finally becoming friends, Aspel, Richard and Sophie carve their name into a tree to make a vow that they will always be friends. A while later, Richard returns to the capital Verona, along with Hubert and Aspel's father Aston. Despite being ordered to stay at home, Aspel and Sophie break out and head for the capital to follow his father and brother. At the capital, the two run into Sheria, who is there on a doctor's visit, and as a group of three, they meet up with Richard, who shows them around town. The four of them then run into Hubert and Aston, who are talking with a foreigner. Aston is annoyed that Aspel has come to the capital, but unable to send him back home, lets Aspel do his own thing. Now with Hubert, the group go off and explore some catacombs beneath the city. There the group are attacked by a terrifying creature who takes them all out. As the last one standing, Sophie takes on the creature by herself and, in a suicide attack, blows herself up to destroy the monster. When Aspel awakens, he's back in Lant. Aston soon walks into the room to inform him what had happened. Aston also reveals that Hubert has been sent to the neighbouring state of Strada to be adopted into the Oswald family, who are currently lacking an heir. Aspel, who is horrified by this news, decides to flee home and head to the capital to become a knight. Jumping 7 years into the future, we meet Aspel now as an 18-year-old knight under the mentorship of one Malak Caesar. Returned to the capital after a mission, Aspel runs into a now adult Sheria, who informs him that his father Aston has died in battle against the nation of Fendel, who are currently invading the lands of Lant. Mortified by this news, Aspel rushes home to Lant to console his mother. Back in Lant, Aspel decides to take on his father's place as Lord, as well as mount a campaign against the invading Fendel troops. During one of the missions, Aspel is suddenly confronted by Sophie, who suddenly reappears before him but lacks any memories of 7 years ago. Despite lacking any memories, Sophie still decides to help Aspel fight off the forces of Fendel. During a sneak attack mission, things go belly up when the Fendel troops launch a sneak attack of their own and begin raiding the town. Lant is only saved when Stradan troops led by Hubert Oswell occupy the town and rat out the Fendel troops. Aspel was glad to see Hubert back in Lant, however Hubert accuses Aspel of abandoning Aston to his death, and after defeating him in a duel, he exiles Aspel out of town. With nowhere else to go, Aspel and Sophie head for the capital to seek help from their friend Prince Richard, but soon learn things in Windor are not all as they seem. The story continues to there, and for the full story breakdown, I can't recommend any one video, so once again you can watch the cutscenes or just play the game yourself. Being made for the Wii, Tales of Graces is very much graphically inferior to the previous Tales of Vesperia, with things like background textures being notably blurry in comparison. While the F version of the game looks a lot better thanks to the HD upscaling of the PlayStation 3, it is still very noticeable that the game was designed with lesser hardware in mind. Despite this, Tales of Graces still presents rather well in comparison to the previous Wii Tales game, that being Tales of Symphonia Dawn of the New World. While Graces lacks the motion captured cutscenes of Dawn of the New World, it makes up for it in the use of more cinematic shots and cutscenes, as well as the use of 2D anime cutscenes done by Production IG in what would be their last mainline Tales game. Despite visually looking like a Team Symphonia game, Tales of Graces is very much a sequel to its previous Team Destiny games of Tales of Destiny PS2 and Tales of Hearts. Just like Tales of Hearts, Tales of Graces uses filled dungeons over a traditional overworld, although this time they are much better with unique designs and layouts. By fixing these two issues, Tales of Graces single-handedly turns one of my least favourite overworld designs into arguably one of the best overworld designs in the series. Thanks in part due to a fixed camera, Tales of Graces overworld is a joy to explore due to its vibrant design as well as being full of items to pick up and places to discover. Speaking about places to discover, Tales of Graces' world is littered with discoverable landmarks. By discovering these landmarks, the party can often obtain items as well as unlock skits which, much like previous Team Destiny games, use the full body style over the box style seen in Team Symphonia games. Along with landmarks, Tales of Graces also helps the players progress through the story by prompting them where to go next if the player holds down a button. Much like the previous Tales games, a quick travel option is also available later on in the game in the form of a flying craft, but until then the party will need to make use of the Turtles transport network to quickly move between town. The Turtles, or as they like to say, Turtles, are an interesting addition to the Tales series, and we'll be seeing a lot more of them in later retrospectives. In this game, they act as a series of merchants who often show up in the strangest locations to sell you their wares. Along with selling you goods, these oddly dressed merchants can also allow the party to perform dualizations. Dualizing is one of Graces' key mechanics as it allows you to merge two items into a different item. This can range from turning scavenged materials into quality items, to turning foodstuff into edible meals, in effect merging the old school Tales cooking mechanics into dualizing. Where dualizing becomes key is in weapon enchanting. Throughout the game, the party will pick up shards which can be dualized with weapons and armor to boost their stats, as well as add effects from buffs to status ailments. While I don't have time to go into the specifics here, let's just say you want to fully verse yourself with dualizing if you want to have optimal equipment in the late game. Dualizing is also a key tool in creating items for side quests. While side quests have appeared in the previous Tales games, they were normally limited to secondary stories that the party could partake in alongside the main game. Meanwhile, here in Graces, we get the more familiar style of side quests, in which add-ins the party can take on singular mission goals which normally boil down to getting an item and delivering it back to the inn. The side missions are a great way of getting extra experience as well as mastering titles. Unlike previous Tales games where titles acted as pseudo-achievement systems with little to no impact on your character's stats, they are now an integral mechanic. While titles are, for the most part, still unlocked in the same way as with previous games, that being by progressing the main story or partaking in side events, they are now the primary progression system. When equipped, characters will slowly master the titles, and in doing so, new arts and skills will be gained, as well as general stat buffs. Alongside all the other stuff I've covered is the Eleth Mixer. This device has multiple uses, from being able to generate items as well as give party-wide buffs both inside and outside of battle. These benefits come at the cost of Eleth, which the device consumes. The party can refill the mixer at shops, as well as picking up additional Eleth found in chests. Going over to talk more about the plot, Tales of Graces' story is rather unique in the fact that it's split into multiple parts. The first part is set during the childhood of most of the cast, and lays out the plot points which become more relevant 7 years later during the second part. The second part is what most people would consider the main game, as it is by far the bulk of the story, in which the adult characters do their usual spiel of saving the world from evil. The third and final part is an additional epilogue chapter added exclusively in the PS3 version of the game. It follows the futures of the characters after the main game, hence the F in the title of the PS3 version. Over the course of these 3 stories, your party will consist of 7 members, although for most of the second act you'll be locked to a party of 6 due to a certain character leaving the group. Tales of Graces' cast is definitely a point of contention in the fanbase, as they are arguably one of the weakest in the series. While nowhere near as bad as the Dawn of the New World cast, Graces' cast can often be quite wooden and not very interesting in comparison to previous casts. This is especially true for Malik, who I quite often forgot was in my party due to how bland he is. This blandness becomes all too apparent when the party meets the 7th and final playable character, Pascal. It generally feels like all the party's unique quirks and features have been sucked out of them and put into Pascal, resulting in a character who feels like they are from a completely different game due to how over the top she is. I don't think Tales of Graces has a bad cast, as I personally prefer them over the cast from Tales of Hearts. I still feel like they're a major step back from the cast of Tales of the Abyss and Vesperia. While Tales of Graces in some respects takes a few steps back with its presentation, it arguably takes several leaps forward with its combat. Tales of Graces finally sees Team Destiny take their first crack at a 3D Tales battle system in the form of the Style Shift Linear Motion Battle System, or SSLMBS. Now, one of the first things you'll notice in this battle system is the rotation of the movement axis by a whole 90 degrees, with up and down on the control stick now used to move the character towards/away from the enemy, instead of left and right. This change in movement layout completely overhauls the classic Tales battle system, as characters can no longer jump or perform low sweep attacks. Instead, by pressing side to side on the control stick, the character can instead perform new sidestepping actions which we haven't seen since Tales of Rebirth and Tempest. However, unlike those games, sidestepping here is an effective evasion technique, with some attacks being easier to evade in a sidestep while others are more easily evaded in a backstep. Movement is not the only feature of the battle system that has seen major changes, as attacks too now work very differently. For a start, characters can no longer perform regular attacks. Instead, by pressing A or X, the character will perform a series of assault arts. These A arts consist of 16 predetermined attacks that will be unleashed depending on the control stick's input, as well as the current stage of the character's combo. For instance, pressing X while playing as Aspel will perform Quick Slash, then pressing X again will perform Nimble Fang, then pressing X while holding up on the stick will perform Bestial Roar, and finally pressing X while holding right on the stick will perform Void Sword. The A art tree can be annoying to use due to some enemies only being weak to arts in the 3rd and 4th columns, and the player having no way to customize it. However, this is where burst arts come in. These B arts work in a similar fashion to arts in old school Tales games, by first being assigned to an input on the control stick. B arts are somewhat designed to work in tandem with A arts, with, for instance, Sherry and Pascal's A arts being physical attacks while their B arts are spells. Speaking of spells, the game also brings back the speed casting mechanic from Tales of Destiny PS2, in which spells can be put into combos and will cast faster the later in the combo they are performed. Also, like in Destiny PS2, we see the return of chain capacity, or CC. However, here it works a bit differently. CC still works to limit the number of attacks you can make in a combo, however it no longer recharges the instant the combo is finished. Instead, it will slowly build back to its current level over a few seconds. The amount CC returns to each time is also different to Destiny PS2. Rather than a cycling up system in that game, CC will initially cap your character's minimum CC, and then will grow to your character's maximum CC by performing actions like critical hits. ARs each cost CC relative to their position in the tree, with the first stage AR costing 1 CC, while the second stage AR costs 2 CC, and so on. This means that a full hit combo using ARs requires the character to have 10 CC. If the character lacks enough CC to do the next AR in the combo, the character will instead default to the AR with the right number of CC. Meanwhile, BRs work much the same way as they did in Destiny PS2, with each costing the set amount of CC, with more powerful BRs costing more CC to use. Arts aren't the only thing with a cost, as stepping once again costs 1 CC to perform. However, by performing a stepping action at the right time to avoid an attack will net the player a regen of 3 CC. Along with stepping, free run also consumes CC. This in some respects makes free run completely useless in this game, as with sidestepping, characters can, for the most part, move around the battle zone pretty freely. With characters being relatively evasive and CC being slow to regen, Tales of Graces' combat system in some respects encourages the player to be less aggressive than they would be in past games. Instead, Graces promotes a more counter-play style in which characters are expected to wait for the enemy to attack, dodge the attack, then lay into them with a whole host of A and B arts. While the game for the most part promotes counterplay, there does come one moment in the battle where aggression is incentivized. On the left side of the battle screen is the Elith gauge. When the blue gauge maxes out, you'll go into Elith Burst, in which all arts will no longer cost CC, thus allowing for unlimited combos until the time runs out. It's also during this point the players will be able to unleash Mystic Arts. While Elith Bursts are great, you aren't the only one able to make use of them, as the enemy will go into Elith Burst as well when the red gauge maxes out. In this situation, the enemy will have super armor, and it's suggested that the player takes evasive action until their burst ends. Going over to the characters, Aspel is your pretty stock standard Tales protagonist, once again being a single-handed sword wielder. Aspel's battle style is loosely based on the Japanese Battle Jutsu style, in which he keeps his sword sheathed and will bash enemies while it's still in its scabbard when using A arts. Switching to B arts will see Aspel bring his sword out of its sheath to perform quick slash attacks in a manner very similar to the samurais he's based off. Meanwhile, Sophie uses her fists to fight, with her A arts often being focused around getting up close to single targets and taking them down with a bunch of quick punches and kicks. While Sophie's A arts are good at taking down single targets, her attacks have limited hitboxes, leaving her vulnerable when multiple enemies swarm her. Switching over to B arts gives Sophie access to a plethora of unique secondary attacks from buffs to range attacks. She also has a bunch of healing spells to take pressure off the primary healer Sheria. Sheria fights mostly with throwing knives, thus allowing her to attack the enemy at a distance at the cost of having some of the weakest A arts in the game. Sheria's B arts for the most part are healing based or light based attack spells. Her healing arts are slower than Sophie's but also have an area of effect to heal multiple allies over just one. Hubert wields a rather unique weapon in the form of his twin blades. These weapons can take the form of either a twin blade, which is used for Hubert's A arts, or twin pistols, which is used for Hubert's B arts. Hubert also possesses a few spells, including 2 healing spells, however he is not recommended as the primary caster. Despite possessing a high physical attack, Hubert is a glass cannon with poor defense, thus players will need to cycle between both his styles to avoid getting hit. Like Chloe, Estelle and Flynn, Richard fills in for the more classic Tales sword fighter with his A and B arts, consisting of a bunch of classic arts. Most of Richard's physical attacks consist of sword thrusting attacks that deal pierce damage, however he can also do a variety of spells, making him somewhat of an all-rounder character. Meanwhile, Malik is nice enough to show my country of Australia some love by wielding a boomerang, or bladering as it's called in the game. Since these A arts involve him throwing his weapon, he is extremely vulnerable to attacks when his weapon is out of hand, thus players need to be careful to always keep Malik away from the enemy. Along with his bladering, Malik is one of the best defensive casters in the party, with a myriad of strong offensive spells at his disposal. Finishing up the party is Pascal, who is one of the strangest playstyles. For her A arts, she uses her shoot staff to blast enemies from a distance. Meanwhile, her B arts are for the most part a series of offensive spells. However, unlike most other characters, Pascal's spells are often area of effect spells centered around her. This means that Pascal zones with her physical attacks while getting up and close and personal with her spells, in a bizarre switcheroo from your usual caster. Toei Sakuraba and Shinichi Tomura once again return to compose the music for Tales of Graces, and to be blunt, it's not exactly their best work. Tales has, for the most part, never been a series with standout soundtracks, however here it is especially generic. From pieces consisting of a few notes to others that are nothing more than a few chords, it's very hard to praise the soundtrack. With the duo composing so many different Tales games, it's kinda hard for their tracks in this game to stand out the entire series' soundscape. This is also driven in part by Grace's lack of a unique musical identity. With games like Symphonia, Rebirth and Vesperia, you could listen to tracks from those games and instantly recognise them as coming from those games. However, Grace's lacks any unique style to differentiate it from the series, and as a result its soundtrack just comes across as generic Tales music. While I'm not a big fan of Grace's soundtrack, it does have some redeeming qualities. The battle theme of Sword Drawing Grind is one of my personal favourite battle themes. Also, the tracks that incorporate the main theme, such as I Want to Protect You, are also solid pieces. Another solid piece has to be the cameo battle theme of Soul Evangelists. Although saying that a piece made up of tracks from past Tales games is one of your best is probably not a good sign for your soundtrack. Unfortunately, the soundtrack is not the only poor aspect of the game's soundscape. After the pretty solid English voice acting in Symphonia Abyss and especially Vesperia, Tales of Graces really drops the ball. A lot of the voice actors sound extremely bored in their performances, especially during reflection scenes where the cast are meant to be giving heart to hearts. While the style does somewhat work for characters like Sophie, it really hinders characters like Richard and Sheria. On the other hand, the acting can be quite hilarious at certain times, both intentional and unintentional.
I did it! I did it! I killed the prince!
Meanwhile, on the comedy side, the voice actors do a pretty good job in portraying the game's more funnier moments, with characters like Pascal once again being highlights, at least for me. Finally finishing up this section, we need to talk about the opening song. Korean singer and songwriter Kwon Boa would be brought on to perform the opening song Memoritai, White Wishes, becoming, to my knowledge, the first non-Japanese person to perform a Tales opening song. The song is alright, but definitely not one of my favourites. Being multilingual though, Boa, like Bonnie Pink before her, would also perform the song in English for the Western release of the game. As for the opening cinematic, as Production IG's last mainline Tales game, it's a good time as any to reflect on how far we've come since their first opening cinematic for Tales of Destiny back in 1997. Tales of Graces definitely has a beautiful opening thanks to its vibrant use of colours and limited amount of CGI to enhance the shots. However, Graces' opening is not exactly one that gets me hyped to play the game in the same way that other openings do, thus I'd probably put it below average. Despite my issues with the soundtrack and voice acting, I still love Tales of Graces. In fact, I'd go as far as to say it's one of the best games in the series, with it comfortably sitting in my top 5 alongside games like Tales of Vesperia. Sure, Tales of Graces has its numerous flaws. It's obvious that this game did not get the same love and attention games like Tales of Vesperia got when it came to crafting a solid story and interesting characters, and the soundtrack is definitely one of the most forgettable in the series. However, Graces' story is still a decently enjoyable plot and the comedy remains top notch as always. However, what really excels Tales of Graces into my top 5 Tales games has to be the combat. Tales of Graces truly has a battle system unlike any other game in the series. I love the counterplay nature of the game, in which you must first wait for the enemy to strike you, rather than just go in sword swinging. Tales of Graces in some respects really brings out that classic samurai trope of two warriors with katanas ready, waiting for the other to attack. The combat also has a lot of depth, from the vast variety of different playstyles of the characters to the numerous mechanics the player can use at any one time to get the upper hand in combat. Let's just say there's a reason people often cite this game as having the best combat of the series. However, Tales of Graces also brings a lot more to the series than just its combat. Its field dungeon overworld is one of my favourite in the series. I think that's driven in part due to how bright and vibrant it is. Its vibrant colours and designs aren't just limited to the field dungeons, as the whole game is beautiful to look at, even with the blurrier textures. Heck, even the box art for this game is one of my favourites in the series. I'm also really glad that I recently got the chance to play this game with 2 friends. Over the span of last year, the 3 of us put our heads together to master the game's combat system and beat the main story. In what has to be some of my top highlights of last year, I still remember laughing out loud at the game's more stupid moments while discussing the best way to tackle the next boss. If you're looking for a Tales game to do multiplayer with friends, Graces is definitely one of my strongest recommendations. Now, to finish off this retrospective, I want to go back to my opening statement and talk about Tales of Graces' legacy on the series. Since I, and most other Tales fans, really enjoyed the combat in this game, it feels like Bandai Namco has repeatedly attempted to replicate this game's battle system in most subsequent Tales games, with, in my opinion, diminishing returns most times. While I love Tales of Grace's CC style combat, I quite frankly have grown tired of it after seeing in every new release, from having to continually look away from my character to see if I have enough CC, to how it trivialises combos. All I have to say is, there are other ways to restrict comboing outside of putting up an arbitrary number. Bring back TP, or even Rebirth's FG system, or perhaps try something completely new. I would just wish Bandai Namco would stop building their battle systems around CC. Speaking about these future Tales games, it's about time I look at the game which for a long time has been considered my favourite game in the series. Will it still hold this title after I do a deep dive into it? Well, we'll find out when I come back next time to look at Tales of Xillia for the PlayStation 3.